A man is not so much injured by what happens to him as by his opinion of what happens. Michel de Montaigne.
Imagine a life spent tailoring yourself to other people's expectations, slowly shaping the way you speak, the way you dress, and the choices you make so that every part of you fits comfortably inside someone else's approval. Every small adjustment becomes another seam stitched carefully into the fabric of your behavior, designed to please the invisible audience that surrounds you each day. You learn to move carefully so that other people can feel comfortable with your outline, and without noticing it, you begin measuring your worth by the softness of their nods. Gradually, you become an actor inside your own life, performing a version of yourself that was quietly negotiated with the expectations of the crowd. Here is the difficult truth. The more you try to be acceptable to everyone around you, the less solid your own presence becomes. The more intensely you chase approval, the thinner and more fragile your sense of self slowly grows. And yet the world teaches the opposite lesson, handing you a script that insists you must care more, work harder, perform better, and manage impressions carefully if you want safety. Pause for a moment and look at that instruction closely, because what appears to be guidance may actually be a costume you were asked to wear. And curiosity begins to whisper a dangerous question. What if the costume itself is the trap? What if the script promising safety is quietly pulling you further away from confidence, freedom, and real success? What if the real path to those things runs not through tighter control, but through the strange discipline of letting go? What if your grip on perfection and on being seen exactly the way you wish to be seen is slowly reshaping you into someone else's idea of a person? This film exists to make that paradox visible and to bring you to a moment of reckoning. A moment where a man who once had everything to lose discovered that surrender was the only strategy that allowed him to win. Later, you will see a sharp turning point involving a near death, a transformation, and a simple idea powerful enough to destabilize everything you thought your life depended on. Stay with me, because in 60 seconds you will know what to watch for, and in 20 minutes you will know what to stop doing tomorrow. Listen carefully, because there is an anatomy to approval, and if you learn how to read its structure, you can remove it from the way you live. The habit of seeking approval grows slowly, but its cost compounds quickly, becoming far heavier than most people ever imagine. At first, it appears only in small choices. The color of a shirt, the way you laugh, the opinions you decide to keep to yourself. Those small decisions accumulate until they become habits, and those habits slowly harden into identity. You begin to imagine that safety exists inside consistency, believing that if you keep the mask in place, people will like you and reward you. But attention is not the same thing as allegiance, and the applause you gain for conformity rarely reaches the real person beneath the mask. Instead, it attaches itself to the performance, and the mask gradually becomes a contract. You perform the role that was negotiated, and the crowd accepts the performance until that contract quietly replaces the original you. Soon you consult the mirror before consulting your heart, calibrating your behavior against reaction rather than desire. This pattern has a name: the economy of approval, a system where your real preferences are traded slowly for the promise of social safety. Authenticity becomes the currency you exchange for belonging, even though the transaction quietly removes your sovereignty. Transactional systems may be efficient, but they place your agency in the hands of other people. Your next move becomes dependent on someone else's gaze, and that dependency quietly creates a corrosive power dynamic. Now consider a contradiction that may sound wrong at first. Caring less about what others think can make you more persuasive and more magnetic. This is not mystical, but strategic, Because when you stop calibrating yourself to external signals, your behavior begins aligning with your internal logic. You stop signaling desperation, you stop explaining why you deserve respect, and you stop trying to prove your worth aloud. Imagine two people speaking in the same room, one delivering rehearsed sentences designed to earn approval while scanning faces for validation. The other speaks from a place that only they fully understand, uncertain and raw but completely willing to be misunderstood. Which one sounds like they own the room? And which one do people remember after the conversation ends? It is almost always the second, because quiet ownership of self attracts attention without begging for it. That quiet presence is a form of power, and it reveals a few simple truths worth remembering. Approval rewards the mask rather than the person. Presence matters more than performance. Surrender can become a strategy, and calm is not emptiness, but solidity. Consider a practical scene. A conference room that smells faintly of coffee, while the carpet holds the memory of rain from the morning outside. People hold ceramic mugs, shuffle papers, and tap keys softly, while fluorescent lights hum above them. A projector casts a pale rectangle against the wall, while slide titles blink in a clean sans-serif font. Anna stands beside the laptop presenting a slide labeled Q2 Risk Mitigation. Summary, speaking steadily as she clicks through graphs, bullet points, and forecast lines. She reads the slides almost like a prayer, and then floods the room with explanations, metrics, fine print, footnotes, and backup slides prepared as defensive armor. Her shoulders rise with each caveat, and her hands repeat the same small circular gestures as she anticipates objections before they arrive. She cannot tolerate the possibility of even a single raised eyebrow in the room. Later, Tom stands to speak and walks to the front without opening a slide deck at all. He states the single decision he believes is correct in 5 simple words, and then stops speaking. He breathes and allows a pause that lasts 5 full seconds, long enough for the silence to rearrange the thinking inside the room. No one interrupts the silence, and eventually Tom continues calmly, moving on without defending his statement. People remember Tom's clarity, while Anna's elaborate justifications dissolve into background noise. If you had to trust someone to lead a fragile project or guide a team through crisis, which person would you choose to follow? That meeting becomes a field test for presence, demonstrating how something as small as a 5-second pause can shift the orientation of an entire group. How often do you prepare elaborate answers for questions that never actually arrive? How many rehearsed lines live inside your mind, like safety pins you carry but never use? When attention shifts away from imagined future fear and toward present action, the nervous system recalibrates. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen and stop multiplying risks that rarely materialize. Imagined catastrophe dissolves into engaged response, and although the shift seems small, it quietly changes everything. This same principle appears most clearly where the stakes are highest, because the world is not simply watching you. It is constantly managing your attention. One of the central figures who explored this idea deeply was the philosopher Michel de Montaigne. Moments like the 5-second pause led thinkers like him to choose solitude over applause and reflection over public prestige. Montaigne withdrew from political life and turned a relentless gaze inward, writing about misfortune, control, and the strange freedom of accepting unpredictability. After nearly dying in an accident, he recognized the limits of preparation and the illusion that life can be engineered like a machine. He concluded that life behaves more like a living flow that must be danced with rather than controlled. From this insight emerges his subtle contradiction. Planning and detachment are not enemies but partners. You can prepare with discipline and still hold your plans lightly, acting with focus while remaining unattached to outcomes. This is not passivity but presence, the ability to act fully without clutching. So imagine an operating theater at dawn, where a young surgeon arrives before sunrise, and the hallway tiles echo quietly beneath her steps. Instruments lie arranged like silent tools of prophecy, gleaming, ordered, and sterile under the lights. She has practiced the same incision thousands of times until the movement lives inside muscle memory. Around her, the surgical team moves like choreography, communicating through nods, gloved hands, and the soft, steady rhythm of monitors. Everything is planned down to the minute. The rhythm of the room steady and rehearsed, every step mapped before the first incision begins. As the chest opens, the unexpected arrives, an artery hidden by anatomy, a pulse that spikes and then collapses, and suddenly the plan begins to falter. Two kinds of surgeons appear in that moment, not by title, but by response, revealing the difference between control and composure. One clings to the idea of perfect control, jaw tightening, hesitation spreading through his movements until decision paralysis quietly takes hold. His gestures grow small and careful, almost apologetic, as if the body on the table might punish him for moving too boldly. The other surgeon breathes, adapts, and trusts the training written deep into muscle memory, improvising calmly within the discipline he spent years building. He speaks short, precise commands, and the team moves with him, guided not by panic, but by clarity. Which surgeon would you trust with what matters most to you, when the plan fails and only presence remains? The lesson is the same outside the operating room. Competence combined with calm, not competence combined with clutching. Most suffering in relationships follows this same pattern, not created by difference, but by the pressure of control. You want someone to stay, so expectations tighten around them until affection begins to feel like surveillance. You demand proof of commitment again and again, not because of love, but because of fear disguised as devotion. This is possessive love, wearing the language of investment, a bond built more on anxiety than freedom. When Étienne de la Boétie wrote about friendship, he imagined something radically different. A bond without ownership, love without claiming, two people meeting without the quiet policing of each other's lives. In that space, people choose each other freely, instead of being pushed into roles by insecurity. Try a small experiment. Release one demand you place on someone you love and say nothing about it. Observe what happens when expectation disappears and the air between you finally has room to move. Often one of two outcomes appears. The person feels relief and moves closer on their own terms. Or the moment reveals that the relationship was sustained only by enforcement rather than desire. Both outcomes deliver something valuable because clarity dissolves anxiety that once disguised itself as love. Detachment works because the human brain reads signals of desperation instantly, long before words explain them. When desperation leaks through behavior, your status quietly drops within invisible social hierarchies. Over-explaining, constant reassurance, exaggerated displays of loyalty, all reveal vulnerability instead of strength. These behaviors make your choices predictable, and predictability slowly erodes both attraction and authority. Detachment sends the opposite signal, coherence, a quiet message that your identity is not built on another person's approval. That signal reduces noise and strengthens integrity, aligning your actions with values rather than fluctuating opinions. Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference, but the two are entirely different forces. Indifference removes care entirely, while detachment simply decides where care deserves to go. It concentrates your life energy like a focused beam, instead of scattering it like distant starlight. Michel de Montaigne once wrote that his life had been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. That sentence cuts deeply because most anxiety is rehearsal for disasters that never arrive. Think about 3 things you are worrying about right now and ask a single question. What evidence proves this will happen? Not what might happen, not what you imagine, but what you actually know. You will discover how much mental energy is spent maintaining fiction. Reclaim that energy, and something shifts immediately in how you move through the world. Approval, after all, is not the same as admiration. Very often, it is simply another form of control. The deeper principle beneath all of this is simple but difficult. Act fully without attaching your identity to the outcome. Imagine an archer drawing the bow, steadying the breath, and releasing the arrow with complete attention. The release belongs to the archer, but where the arrow lands belongs to circumstance. Skill belongs to you. Outcomes belong to the wider field of chance. Detachment does not remove effort, it removes ego from the measurement of results. Without ego entangled in outcomes, learning becomes sharper and feedback becomes information instead of judgment. Presence is the final piece, the discipline of placing attention on what is happening now rather than rehearsing imagined futures. Presence is where responsiveness lives, and responsiveness is where freedom quietly appears. You were taught that caring more creates control, yet reality often reveals the opposite pattern. Caring less about the wrong things creates space for the right things to grow. Detachment is not apathy, it is the deliberate allocation of life energy. Tonight, try a small experiment. Do one meaningful action without explaining it or seeking approval. Say nothing about it, and watch what happens inside you and around you. You will discover either relief or clarity, and both are forms of progress. When the need to be constantly right or constantly liked dissolves, a different kind of calm appears. Not the calm of emptiness, but the calm of solidity, where decisions sharpen and relationships simplify. Life stops feeling like a stage you must perform upon and begins to resemble a field you can walk through. And then comes the reckoning I promised, a moment when control fractures and perspective rearranges itself. He was driving home late one night, rain spreading a thin reflective coat across the highway. Streetlights stretched into long, nervous streaks across the wet asphalt, while the radio murmured a song he barely recognized. A delivery truck, hidden in the spray, suddenly hydroplaned into his lane, collapsing distance in an instant. There is a particular silence when the world narrows to a single moment of consequence. The sounds of the car change, the tires speak a new language, and the steering wheel feels strangely distant in your hands. His grip tightened until his knuckles whitened and time itself seemed to fold inward. There was no speech about mortality waiting for him, no careful preparation for the idea of death. Only gravity, speed, and a sudden clarity about the few things that truly mattered. A photograph on the dashboard, a name in memory, a dream he had postponed for too long. The car spun, and for a breath that felt both endless and instant, he floated between control and surrender. When the world settled again, nothing looked exactly the same. He did not make a dramatic vow or write a manifesto about the meaning of life. Instead, he began doing something much quieter and far more difficult. He started letting go. Not theatrical surrender, but practical relinquishing of the constant accounting of approval. The endless calculations about how he appeared to others slowly evaporated. He stopped calibrating every decision against an imagined audience, watching from somewhere beyond the room. In that moment, surrender was not weakness, but recentering. It was the skillful release of control so attention could return to the life he actually wanted to live. That is the paradox. When you stop trying to control perception, your presence becomes stronger. You become less flexible for the crowd and more solid for yourself. So try a small architecture of detachment in your own life. Choose one day this week and make one decision without seeking consent, comment, or applause. Eat what you want, wear what you prefer, and notice how the world responds to quiet certainty. Practice the 5-second pause before explaining or justifying anything. You may discover how often silence invites clarity instead of conflict. Write down the 3 disaster scenarios you rehearse most often in your mind. Then ask yourself honestly, what evidence proves they will actually happen? Release one expectation you quietly place on someone you love and observe whether the relationship breathes more easily. Measure outcomes as information rather than destiny, and treat results as data instead of personal verdicts. These small actions slowly build a different nervous habit, one based on presence rather than approval. The surgeon still prepares, the archer still trains, and the person who practices detachment still cares deeply. The difference is that their worth is no longer tied to the landing place of the arrow. Turn the cloth of your life inside out and look at the seams you once stitched to satisfy the crowd. Use those same seams to create a coat that finally belongs to you. This is not rebellion for spectacle, but a quiet reallocation of attention. A decision to measure your life by what you choose rather than what others reward. So ask yourself one final question. What are you holding so tightly that it hurts? Imagine loosening your grip and notice what might move toward you when the tension disappears. Power is not always the loudest voice in the room. Very often it belongs to the person who no longer needs to be heard, because they are already listening. Stop tailoring your life for the crowd. Be found by the life you quietly choose. If you made it this far, you're part of the small percentage of people who truly want to change their lives. Leave a like, subscribe, and share this video so that, just like you, more people can develop a sovereign mindset. Don't miss the next video. It could be your first step toward becoming truly sovereign.